The bitter wind howled mercilessly, carrying ice crystals that stung Grace Blackburn's face like tiny needles as she struggled through knee-deep snow. Her 5-year-old daughter Emma clutched tightly against her chest. The broken wagon wheel that had spelled their doom now lay miles behind them, buried beneath the relentless blizzard that had descended upon the Sierra Nevada mountains with unexpected fury in February of 1872. "Mama, I'm so cold," Emma whimpered, her small body shivering violently despite being wrapped in every woolen garment Grace could spare. "Just a little further, sweetheart," Grace promised, though she had no idea where they were headed. The trail to Redding, California had vanished hours ago beneath the white blanket that seemed determined to become their shroud. Her husband Thomas had died of pneumonia 3 months prior in Sacramento, leaving Grace with nothing but debts and a small child to raise. The promise of a teaching position in the growing town of Redding had been her last hope. Now, that hope was fading with each labored step. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, and her vision blurred as the temperature continued to drop with the setting sun. Emma had grown ominously quiet in her arms, her eyes fluttering closed. "Emma, darling, you must stay awake," Grace pleaded, jostling the child gently. "Tell me again about the kitten you want when we reach Redding." But Emma's only response was a weak moan. Panic surged through Grace's weary body. She could not lose her daughter, not after everything they had survived. Summoning her last reserves of strength, she pushed forward, praying for a miracle. Miles away, Bryson Calloway pulled his hat lower against the biting wind as he urged his horse forward through the deepening snow. He'd spent 3 days tracking a mountain lion that had been preying on local livestock, only to lose the trail when the blizzard hit. Now, all he wanted was to make it back to his cabin before nightfall claimed the last vestiges of daylight. Bryson had been rangering these mountains for 5 years, ever since returning from the war with too many ghosts and too little patience for the towns springing up across the west. Here, in his solitary cabin tucked into the foothills near Redding, he'd found a measure of peace. The snow was falling so thickly now that he could barely see 20 feet ahead. His horse, Thunder, snorted uneasily, ears flicking forward and back. Bryson patted the animal's neck reassuringly. "Just a bit further, boy," he murmured, though in truth, he was beginning to worry they had veered off course. Thunder suddenly stopped, pawing at the ground and nickering softly. "What is it?" Bryson asked, scanning the white landscape. That's when he saw it a splash of dark color against the endless white. At first, he thought it might be a fallen tree branch, but as Thunder cautiously moved closer, the shape resolved into something that made his heart skip a beat. A woman. And she was holding someone small in her arms. Bryson dismounted quickly, sinking into snow that reached mid-thigh. He pushed forward, calling out, "Hello there. Are you all right?" No response came from the huddled figure. Drawing closer, Bryson saw she was curled protectively around a child, both of them nearly covered by the accumulating snow. The woman's face was pale, her lips tinged blue, but he could see the faint cloud of her breath in the frigid air. Still alive, but barely. "Madam." Bryson gently touched her shoulder. "Madam, can you hear me?" The woman's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises the color of summer sage. "My daughter," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Please, save Emma." "I'll help you both," Bryson promised, already shrugging out of his heavy buffalo coat. He wrapped it around the mother and child, noting with alarm how still the little girl was. "What's your name, madam?" "Grace," she managed, her teeth chattering violently. "Grace Blackburn." "I'm Bryson Calloway. My cabin's not far from here. Can you stand?" Grace tried to push herself up but collapsed back into the snow. I can't feel my legs." Bryson made a quick decision. I'm going to take your daughter first. She needs warmth immediately. He gently pried the child from Grace's arms, noting how the mother's fingers reluctantly released their grip. I'll come right back for you, I promise. Emma was limp in his arms, her face alarmingly pale. Bryson cradled her carefully against his chest, using his body to shield her from the wind as he returned to Thunder. I'll be right back, he assured Grace, who was watching him with desperate eyes. Please hurry, she whispered. Bryson mounted carefully, keeping Emma secure against him. He urged Thunder into a controlled trot, away from the drifting snow toward his cabin, which was thankfully less than a mile distant. The little girl didn't stir during the journey, but he could feel the shallow rise and fall of her chest against his own. His cabin appeared through the swirling white, a solid, reassuring structure of squared logs with a stone chimney from which a thin wisp of smoke still rose. Bryson had banked the fire before leaving that morning, a habit that might now save 2 lives. Inside, he quickly laid Emma on his bed and stoked the fire to a roaring blaze. He wrapped her in his warmest blankets, noting with relief that her skin, while cold, didn't show signs of severe frostbite. He chafed her tiny hands between his own, willing warmth back into her body. "You'll be all right, little one," he murmured, though she remained unconscious. "Just hold on while I fetch your mama." Leaving the cabin door unlatched, Bryson mounted Thunder once more and rode hard back to where he'd left Grace. The snow was falling even more heavily now, and for a terrible moment, he feared he wouldn't be able to find her again. But Thunder seemed to know the way, and soon Bryson spotted the dark shape against the white landscape. Grace hadn't moved, and this time he couldn't see the reassuring cloud of her breath. "Grace," he called, sliding from his horse and rushing to her side. "Grace, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered and relief flooded through him. She was still alive, but barely. "Emma," she whispered. "She's safe in my cabin, getting warm," he assured her, gathering her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, though her sodden clothes added significant weight. "Now it's your turn." Grace's head lolled against his shoulder as he carried her to Thunder. Mounting while holding her was a challenge, but years of working with horses had given Bryson the strength and skill required. He settled her across his lap, her body curled against his chest. "Stay with me, Grace," he urged as her eyes drifted closed again. "Talk to me. Tell me about your daughter." Grace murmured, her voice thin and weak. "She's everything, so brave, like her father." "And where is her father?" Bryson asked, keeping her engaged as Thunder carefully picked his way through the deepening snow. "Gone, pneumonia. 3 months ago we were going to Reading." Teaching position. Bryson tightened his hold on her as she shivered violently. "You're a teacher." "Was," she corrected faintly. "In Sacramento." They reached the cabin and Bryson dismounted carefully, still holding Grace. He carried her inside, where the warmth of the fire immediately enveloped them. Emma remained unconscious on the bed, but her color looked slightly better. "Emma." Grace reached weakly toward her daughter as Bryson set her down on the chair near the fire. "She's warming up," he assured her. "Now we need to get you out of these wet clothes." Grace's eyes widened slightly, a hint of alarm visible despite her exhaustion. "I'll turn my back," Bryson promised, already moving to his trunk to retrieve a spare shirt and trousers. "But you need dry clothing or you'll develop pneumonia yourself." He set the clothes beside her and busied himself preparing hot coffee, keeping his back turned as promised. He heard the soft rustle of fabric as Grace struggled to change. I need help," she finally admitted, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. Bryson turned to find her half-dressed, his shirt clutched to her chest, her fingers too numb to manage the buttons. Her face was flushed with embarrassment despite her pallor. "May I?" he asked gently. At her nod, he approached and helped her don his shirt, keeping his eyes respectfully averted as much as possible. His hands were steady as they fastened the buttons, though he couldn't help but notice the delicate curve of her collarbone, the pulse fluttering at the base of her throat. Grace was beautiful, even in her current state, a fact that Bryson acknowledged and then firmly set aside. This woman needed his help, not his admiration. Once she was dressed in his too large clothing, he wrapped her in blankets and guided her to the small sofa near the fire. The coffee will be ready soon. It'll help warm you from the inside. Thank you, she whispered, her gaze returning to Emma. Will she be all right? Bryson crossed to check on the child, placing a gentle hand on her forehead. Her temperature is coming up. Children are remarkably resilient. I suspect she'll be just fine after a good rest. As if to confirm his words, Emma stirred slightly, turning her head and sighing in her sleep. Grace sagged with relief, tears springing to her eyes. I was certain we would die out there if you hadn't come along. But I did, Bryson interrupted gently. And now you're safe. He poured coffee into a tin cup and added a spoonful of honey, a luxury he rarely indulged in but kept for medicinal purposes. Drink this slowly. The warmth will help. Grace accepted the cup with trembling hands, and Bryson steadied it as she took her first sip. It's good, she murmured, surprised. Army taught me one useful thing: how to make decent coffee, he said with a faint smile. As the coffee and fire worked to restore Grace's vitality, Bryson prepared a simple meal of beans and salt pork. The storm continued to rage outside, wind whistling through the smallest cracks in his carefully constructed cabin. How long have you lived here? Grace asked, her voice stronger now. 5 years, Bryson replied, stirring the beans. Built this place myself after I came back from the war. The war, Grace echoed softly. My husband Thomas fought as well, with the Union. Bryson nodded. Same side then. I was with the 5th California Infantry. Thomas rarely spoke of it, Grace said, her gaze distant. Only in his nightmares. Bryson understood all too well. His own sleep was often disturbed by memories he'd prefer to forget. Some things are better left unspoken. Their conversation was interrupted by a small sound from the bed. Emma was stirring, her eyes blinking open in confusion. Mama, she called, her voice high with fear. I'm here, darling. Grace tried to stand but swayed dangerously. Bryson steadied her with a hand on her elbow. Let me bring her to you. He approached the bed slowly, not wanting to frighten the child. Hello, Emma. My name is Bryson. I found you and your mama in the snow. You're safe now. Emma regarded him with solemn brown eyes, her small face framed by dark curls. She looked remarkably like her mother, save for her eyes. Are you a real cowboy? She asked cautiously. Bryson smiled. Something like that. I track animals and help keep the rancher's livestock safe. Do you have a horse? I do. His name is Thunder. This seemed to satisfy Emma, who allowed Bryson to lift her, blankets and all, and carry her to her mother. The child immediately curled into Grace's embrace. You carried me? Emma asked, looking up at Bryson with newfound respect. I did. You were sleeping very soundly. Like a princess, Emma declared with all the certainty of childhood. Grace smoothed her daughter's curls, her eyes meeting Bryson's over Emma's head. Yes, sweetheart. Mr. Calloway carried you just like a princess. Bryson felt an unexpected warmth spread through his chest at the sight of mother and daughter reunited. It had been a long time since he'd felt anything beyond the satisfaction of a job well done or a successful hunt. The food's ready, he said, turning away to hide his discomfort with these unfamiliar emotions. You both need to eat to rebuild your strength. They ate in companionable silence, The only sounds the howling wind outside and the occasional pop from the fireplace. Emma fell asleep again halfway through her meal, her small body curled trustingly against her mother's side. "The storm won't let up before morning," Bryson observed, taking their empty plates. "You're welcome to stay until it's safe to travel." "Thank you," Grace said simply. "I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." "No need," Bryson replied. Anyone would have done the same, but they both knew that wasn't true. The wilderness was harsh and unforgiving, and not everyone would risk their own safety for strangers. "Where exactly were you headed in Reading?" Bryson asked, changing the subject. "The schoolhouse. I have a letter offering me the teaching position." Grace hesitated. "At least I did have it. It was in my bag, which was with our wagon when the wheel broke." "When the weather clears, I can help you look for your belongings," Bryson offered. "Where did you leave the wagon?" Grace described the location as best she could, though she admitted she had become disoriented during the storm. "I think I know the area," Bryson said. "It's about 5 miles south of here, near Crooked Creek. We walked that far in the storm." Grace looked incredulous. "Fear and determination can carry a person a long way," Bryson observed, "especially a mother protecting her child." Grace glanced down at Emma's sleeping form. "I would do anything for her after Thomas died." She swallowed hard. "She's all I have left." The vulnerability in her voice stirred something protective in Bryson. He understood loss all too well, had experienced enough of it to last several lifetimes. "You should rest," he said gently. "Take the bed with Emma. I'll sleep here by the fire." Grace started to protest, but exhaustion was clearly overtaking her. "Thank you, Bryson, for everything," he nodded, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Sleep well, Grace." As mother and daughter settled into his bed, Bryson wrapped himself in a blanket and stretched out on the floor near the fire. Outside, the blizzard continued its assault, but inside the cabin, a sense of peace had settled, unfamiliar but not unwelcome. Dawn brought a temporary lull in the storm. Bryson awoke to find Grace already up, attempting to make coffee using the last embers of the night's fire. "Allow me," he said, moving to help. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I expected," she admitted. "Emma is still asleep. She's always been able to sleep through anything." "A useful trait in these parts," Bryson observed, rekindling the fire with practiced efficiency. They worked together, preparing a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush, sweetened with the last of his honey. The domesticity of the scene was foreign to Bryson, who had grown accustomed to solitude. Yet he found himself enjoying Grace's quiet company. "The storm will likely resume by midday," he noted, glancing out the window at the heavy clouds. "But this break gives us a chance to check on your wagon and retrieve your belongings." "Is it safe to leave Emma here?" Grace asked, concern evident in her voice. "She'll be warm and secure." "We won't be gone long, and she's sleeping soundly." After some deliberation, Grace agreed. She left a note beside the bed explaining where they had gone, in case Emma woke during their absence. Outside, the world was transformed into a glittering white expanse. Bryson helped Grace mount Thunder, then swung up behind her. He was acutely aware of her warmth against his chest, the scent of her hair somehow still carrying a hint of lavender despite their ordeal. "Hold tight," he instructed as Thunder picked his way through the deep snow. Grace's hands gripped the saddle horn, her back straight and tense against him. They rode in silence for a time, the only sounds the crunch of Thunder's hooves in the snow and the occasional distant call of a bird. "How did you end up out here alone?" Grace finally asked. "Most men I know prefer company." Bryson considered the question. Few people asked him personal questions anymore. Most in Reading had learned he preferred his privacy. "The war changed me," he said finally. "Made it hard to be around people. Out here, things are simpler." "Simpler, but lonely," Grace observed. Loneliness is preferable to some alternatives, Bryson replied, thinking of the nightmares, the memories that sometimes threatened to overwhelm him when he was among crowds. Grace was quiet for a moment. Thomas was the same way after he returned. He couldn't bear crowds or loud noises. He took a job as a bookkeeper because it was quiet work. Smart man, Bryson said, recognizing a kindred spirit in Grace's late husband. He was, she agreed softly. He loved Emma more than anything. It broke his heart to leave us. As they continued south, Bryson found himself sharing more about his life than he had with anyone in years. Something about Grace Blackburn made it easy to talk, perhaps the fact that she understood loss in a way few others did. They found the abandoned wagon near Crooked Creek, partially buried in snow but otherwise intact. The broken wheel had indeed been the cause of their misfortune. The axles damaged too, Bryson noted as he examined the undercarriage. It would have failed soon even if the wheel hadn't broken first. Grace sighed, retrieving her carpet bag from beneath the wagon seat. At least our belongings are still here. I was afraid animals or thieves might have found it. Thieves aren't common in these parts, Bryson assured her. Too few people to steal from, and most of us are well armed. Grace opened her bag to check its contents. The letter is still here, she said with relief, extracting a slightly damp envelope. And Emma's doll. She would have been heartbroken to lose it. Bryson eyed the broken wagon thoughtfully. I can't fix this here, but I could bring tools back when the weather improves. Or we could arrange for someone from town to retrieve it. I have no money to pay for repairs, Grace admitted, a flash of embarrassment crossing her face. Everything we had went to settling Thomas's debts and purchasing train tickets to Sacramento. We'll figure something out, Bryson assured her, helping her secure her bag to Thunder's saddle. For now, let's get back before the storm returns. They had only covered half the distance back to the cabin when the wind picked up again, carrying the first fresh flakes of snow. Bryson urged Thunder to a faster pace, one arm instinctively circling Grace's waist to keep her secure. Hold on, he called over the rising wind. It's going to get rough. Grace leaned back against him, trusting him to keep her safe. The simple act of faith touched something in Bryson that had been dormant for years. They reached the cabin just as the storm unleashed its full fury once more. Emma was awake and standing anxiously by the window, her small face lighting up when she saw them approaching. "Mama," she cried as they entered, rushing to embrace Grace. "I woke up and you were gone." "I left you a note, sweetheart," Grace reminded her gently, hugging her daughter close. "Mr. Calloway and I went to find our things. Look, I brought your doll." Emma accepted the rag doll with delight, then turned to Bryson with unexpected seriousness. "Thank you for taking care of my mama." Bryson found himself smiling at the child's solemn gratitude. "You're very welcome, Miss Emma." The storm kept them confined to the cabin for 3 more days. During that time, a curious transformation occurred within the small dwelling. What had once been Bryson's solitary refuge became something else entirely, a home filled with conversation, laughter, and the particular brand of chaos that seemed to follow children everywhere. Emma proved to be as resilient as her mother, recovering quickly from their ordeal in the snow. She explored every corner of the cabin with boundless curiosity, asking Bryson endless questions about his life as a cowboy, a term he didn't correct, though his work was more accurately described as rangering. "You shoot bad guys?" she asked on the second day, watching him clean his rifle. "Sometimes I have to scare off predators that might harm livestock," he answered carefully. "But I try not to shoot anything I don't need to." "Papa said killing should always be the last choice," Emma stated, surprising Bryson with her understanding. "Your papa was a wise man," he replied, catching Grace's eye across the room. She was mending one of Emma's dresses, her nimble fingers working the needle with practiced ease. "He was the wisest," Emma agreed solemnly, before moving on to her next pressing question. "Why don't you have a wife?" "Emma," Grace admonished, looking mortified, "that's not a polite question." Bryson chuckled, unbothered by the child's directness. "It's all right. I suppose I haven't found the right woman, Emma." "What's the right woman like?" Emma persisted, clearly invested in the topic. Bryson paused, considering. He'd never given it much thought after the war. Survival and then solitude had consumed his focus. "Someone kind," he said finally. "Someone brave and honest. Someone who sees the world as it is but still finds beauty in it." His eyes met Grace's across the room, and a moment of understanding passed between them. She looked away first, her cheeks flushing slightly as she returned to her mending. On the morning of the fourth day, they awoke to silence. The storm had finally exhausted itself, leaving behind a pristine white landscape glittering under a brilliant blue sky. "We should be able to reach Reading today," Bryson announced after checking conditions outside. "The main road should be passable, especially with thunder breaking trail." Grace nodded, but Bryson noted a flicker of something apprehension, regret, cross her face. "Are we leaving today, Mama?" Emma asked, clearly less than enthusiastic about the prospect. "We need to get to Reading, darling. I have to present my letter to the school board before they give the position to someone else." "But I like it here with Mr. Bryson," Emma protested. "Can't we stay just one more day?" Grace and Bryson exchanged glances. "Mr. Calloway has been very kind," Grace said gently, "but we've imposed on his hospitality long enough." "You're welcome to stay," Bryson found himself saying, surprising them all himself most of all. "At least until we can arrange proper transportation to town. The roads will still be difficult today." Relief washed over Grace's face. "If you're certain it's no trouble." "No trouble," he assured her, ignoring the voice in his head that warned against prolonging their stay. These past days had awakened feelings he'd thought long-buried feelings that would only make the inevitable parting more difficult. But one more day couldn't hurt, he reasoned. One more day of Grace's quiet companionship and Emma's inquisitive chatter before returning to his solitary existence. They spent the day in domestic harmony. Bryson ventured out to check his trap lines, returning with 2 rabbits that Grace transformed into a savory stew. She had discovered his small cache of vegetables, potatoes, carrots, and onions stored in the root cellar beneath the cabin floor and put them to good use. "This is the best meal I've had in months," Bryson admitted as they sat around the table that evening. "You're quite a cook, Grace." "Thomas always said I could make a feast from scraps," she replied with a small, sad smile. "It was a necessary skill after the war, when everything was scarce." "Will you teach me to hunt, Mr. Bryson?" Emma asked, changing the subject with a child's natural instinct for avoiding melancholy. "That's up to your mother," Bryson deferred, though the thought of teaching the eager child some of his skills brought an unexpected warmth to his chest. "Perhaps fishing would be a better start than hunting," Grace suggested diplomatically. "Less dangerous." "I can teach you both to fish come spring," Bryson offered without thinking. "The creek behind the cabin is full of trout when the water warms." An awkward silence followed his words. By spring, Grace and Emma would be settled in Reading, their brief stay in his cabin nothing more than a memory. The thought left a hollow feeling in Bryson's stomach. "I'd like that," Emma said wistfully, clearly not recognizing the impossibility of the plan. Later, after Emma had fallen asleep, Bryson and Grace sat before the fire, each lost in thought. The crackling flames cast dancing shadows across Grace's face, highlighting the delicate curve of her cheekbone, the gentle line of her jaw. "Thank you for all you've done for us," Grace said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "I don't know if I've said that properly." "You don't need to keep thanking me," Bryson replied, embarrassed by her gratitude. "Anyone would have helped." "No, they wouldn't have," Grace contradicted gently. "You're a good man, Bryson Calloway, though you seem determined not to acknowledge it." Her words penetrated the carefully constructed barriers around his heart. "I've done things I'm not proud of," he said roughly. "Things that can't be undone. Haven't we all?" Grace's voice was soft but firm. "Life isn't about avoiding mistakes, it's about what we choose to become despite them." Bryson studied her face, marveling at the quiet strength he saw there. This woman had lost her husband, faced poverty and uncertainty, and still managed to maintain her dignity and compassion. "You're quite remarkable, Grace Blackburn," he said before he could stop himself. A blush colored her cheeks. "Hardly remarkable, just stubborn, according to Thomas." "Stubbornness is an underrated virtue," Bryson observed with a faint smile. "Especially out here." Grace laughed softly, the sound warming the cabin more effectively than the fire. "I'm beginning to think so." Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary, and Bryson felt something shift between them, something tentative and fragile, yet undeniably real. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Bryson knew the roads would be passable now, and he could no longer justify keeping Grace and Emma at his cabin. It was time for them to continue to Reading, to the new life that awaited them. The thought filled him with a melancholy he hadn't experienced in years. "I can take you to town today," he announced over breakfast, keeping his voice neutral. "The main road should be clear enough for travel." "Oh," Grace said, her own expression carefully composed. "Yes, of course. We've imposed on you long enough." "It's not an imposition," Bryson corrected quickly. "But I know you're anxious to secure your teaching position." "Yes," Grace agreed, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. "The school board will be wondering what happened to me." They prepared for departure with an efficiency that belied their reluctance. Grace packed their few belongings while Bryson readied Thunder for the journey. Emma was unusually quiet, her earlier exuberance dampened by the reality of leaving. As they were about to depart, she suddenly threw her arms around Bryson's legs. "I don't want to go," she declared, her voice muffled against his trousers. Bryson knelt to her level, gently disentangling himself from her embrace. "Reading is a nice town, Emma. You'll make friends there, and your mama will be teaching other children like you." "But they won't be you," Emma insisted with a child's simple logic. "And they won't have a horse named Thunder." Bryson felt a lump form in his throat. "You can visit," he found himself promising. "When the weather is better." Emma's face brightened. "Really? Can we, Mama?" Grace looked torn between hope and hesitation. "If Mr. Calloway doesn't mind visitors." "I'd welcome it," Bryson said, surprising himself with his sincerity. The prospect of seeing them again lightened the weight of their departure. The journey to Reading took most of the morning. Thunder carried them steadily through the snow-covered landscape, with Emma seated before Bryson and Grace behind, her arms lightly circling his waist. The arrangement was practical but intimate, forcing an awareness of each other that was both pleasant and unsettling. Reading appeared on the horizon just before noon, a growing settlement nestled in a valley, smoke rising from numerous chimneys. As they approached, Bryson felt Grace stiffen slightly behind him. "Nervous?" he asked quietly, so Emma wouldn't hear. "A little," Grace admitted. "It's been a long time since I've had to prove myself to strangers." "You'll impress them," Bryson assured her. "Any fool can see you're an excellent teacher. Just watching you with Emma shows that." Grace's hand squeezed his arm gratefully. "Thank you for that." They drew curious stares as they rode into town. Reading wasn't so large that a stranger went unnoticed, especially one accompanied by the reclusive Bryson Calloway. He felt the weight of eyes upon them but ignored the attention, focused on getting Grace and Emma safely to their destination. "The schoolhouse should be near the church," he told Grace, guiding Thunder down the muddy main street. "And there's a boarding house nearby where you might find lodging until more permanent arrangements can be made." The schoolhouse proved to be a neat white building with a small bell tower. Adjacent to it stood a modest cottage that Bryson assumed was meant for the teacher's residence. "It's lovely," Grace breathed, taking in the scene. "Smaller than Sacramento, I imagine," Bryson observed. "Perfect," she countered with a smile that transformed her face. "Just what we need, a fresh start." Something twisted in Bryson's chest at her words. A fresh start, without him. He helped them dismount, then retrieved Grace's carpet bag from Thunder's saddle. "The school board president is Harold Jenkins," he informed her. "His store is just down the street. He's a fair man, if a bit formal." Grace straightened her borrowed clothes, still Bryson's shirt and trousers, though she'd done her best to make them presentable. "Do I look terribly inappropriate?" she asked with a touch of anxiety. "You look like a woman who survived a blizzard," Bryson replied honestly. "Jenkins will understand once you explain." Emma clung to her mother's hand, suddenly shy in the face of the town's activity. "Will people be nice here?" "Most of them," Bryson assured her, crouching to her level. "And those who aren't, well, they're not worth worrying about." This earned him a small smile. "Will you come visit us too, Mr. Bryson?" The question caught him off guard. His usual pattern was to avoid town as much as possible, coming in only when necessary for supplies or to report on predator activities to the local ranchers. But looking at Emma's hopeful face, and then at Grace's carefully neutral expression, Bryson found himself nodding. "When I can," he promised. They walked together to Jenkins' general store, where they found the proprietor tallying his ledger behind the counter. Harold Jenkins was a stout man with mutton-chop whiskers and spectacles perched on his nose. He looked up in surprise at their entrance. "Calloway," he acknowledged with a nod. "Rare to see you in town these days, Mr. Jenkins." Bryson returned the greeting. "This is Mrs. Grace Blackburn and her daughter Emma. Mrs. Blackburn is here about the teaching position." Jenkins' eyebrows rose. "We'd given up expecting you, Mrs. Blackburn. Your letter indicated you would arrive last week." "We were caught in the blizzard," Grace explained, producing the letter from her bag. "Our wagon broke down in the mountains. If not for Mr. Calloway, we wouldn't have survived." Jenkins' expression softened. "A harrowing journey indeed. Well, the position is still open. None of the local candidates proved suitable, but the school board will want to meet with you before making a final decision." "Of course," Grace agreed readily. "I'm prepared to answer any questions they might have." "I'll arrange a meeting for tomorrow morning," Jenkins decided. "In the meantime, you'll need lodging. Mrs. Peterson's boarding house has a vacancy, I believe." "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. You're very kind." As Jenkins gave Grace directions to the boarding house, Bryson found himself reluctant to leave. The moment of parting had arrived, yet something held him in place, unwilling to say goodbye. When Grace turned back to him, her expression mirrored his own conflicted feelings. "I don't know how to thank you properly," she began. "No need," Bryson cut her off gently. "Just take care of yourself and Emma." "We will," Grace promised. She hesitated, then stepped forward and placed a light kiss on his cheek. "Goodbye, Bryson." Emma was less reserved, throwing her arms around his waist in a fierce hug. "Bye, Mr. Bryson. Don't forget you promised we could visit." "I won't forget," he assured her, awkwardly patting her back. And then they were walking away, Grace and Emma hand in hand, heading toward their new life in Reading. Bryson watched them go, feeling as though something essential was leaving with them. Remarkable, Jenkins commented beside him. Not many would have survived that storm. She's stronger than she looks, Bryson replied absently, still watching as Grace and Emma turned the corner and disappeared from view. The woman or the child? Jenkins asked with surprising perception. Both, Bryson answered. Then, shaking himself from his reverie, he nodded a farewell to Jenkins and returned to Thunder. The ride back to his cabin seemed longer than usual, the silence more oppressive. Thunder's hoofbeats echoed in the snow-covered forest, a rhythmic counterpoint to Bryson's troubled thoughts. He told himself it was for the best. Grace and Emma deserved a normal life, a community, opportunities, stability. Things he couldn't provide in his isolated existence. Yet when he reached his cabin, the emptiness of it struck him as never before. Signs of Grace and Emma's brief presence were everywhere. The neatly folded blankets on the bed, the small wooden figure Bryson had carved to entertain Emma during the storm, the faint scent of lavender that somehow lingered despite the cabin's perpetual aroma of wood smoke and coffee. For the first time in years, Bryson Calloway felt truly alone. Days passed, then weeks. Winter gradually loosened its grip on the mountains as February gave way to March. Bryson threw himself into his work, tracking predators, helping local ranchers with early calving, and repairing his cabin and outbuildings in preparation for spring. But thoughts of Grace and Emma intruded constantly. He found himself wondering if they had settled well in Reading, if Grace had secured her teaching position, if Emma had made friends among the town's children. Several times he considered riding into town, ostensibly for supplies but really to catch a glimpse of them. Each time he talked himself out of it. What would be the point? They were establishing a new life, one that didn't include a solitary, scarred ex-soldier with more ghosts than future. The decision was taken out of his hands one blustery March afternoon when a rider approached his cabin. Bryson was splitting wood in the yard and he paused, axe in hand, as he recognized Harold Jenkins atop a sturdy bay gelding. "Jenkins," he greeted the storekeeper with surprise. "You're a long way from your counter." "Indeed I am," Jenkins agreed, dismounting stiffly. He was not a man accustomed to long rides, but the matter couldn't wait for your next infrequent visit to town. Alarm prickled along Bryson's spine. "Has something happened?" Jenkins gave him a shrewd look. "You might say that. Mrs. Blackburn has been asking after you." Relief flooded through Bryson, followed immediately by confusion. "Asking after me? Why?" "She didn't confide her reasons," Jenkins replied dryly. "But the little girl Emma, she's been telling anyone who'll listen about the brave cowboy who saved them from the blizzard and carried her through the snow." Embarrassment warmed Bryson's face. "Children exaggerate." "Do they?" Jenkins raised a bushy eyebrow. "From what Mrs. Peterson tells me, you're something of a hero to both mother and daughter." Bryson set down his axe, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. They survived a dangerous situation. It's natural they might feel some gratitude. Jenkins snorted. "For a man who tracks predators for a living, you're remarkably blind to what's right in front of you." "What are you implying, Jenkins?" "I'm not implying anything," the storekeeper retorted. "I'm stating plainly that Mrs. Blackburn has taken the teaching position, settled into the teacher's cottage, and is doing admirably with the children, but according to Mrs. Peterson, she looks toward the mountains every day as if expecting someone." Bryson's heart gave a peculiar lurch. "She's probably just wary of more storms." Jenkins sighed with exaggerated patience. "Calloway, I didn't ride all the way out here to engage in this pointless dance. The woman has feelings for you. Anyone with eyes can see it. The question is, what do you intend to do about it?" "Do about it," Bryson repeated, genuinely at a loss. The possibility that Grace might return his growing affection had never seriously occurred to him. "Yes, do about it," Jenkins confirmed impatiently. "Are you going to continue hiding in these mountains, or are you going to be man enough to pursue what might be your last chance at happiness?" Bryson stared at the older man, momentarily speechless at his bluntness. Jenkins softened slightly. "Look, I don't normally involve myself in others' personal affairs, but I fought in the Mexican War. I know what battle does to a man. And I know that sometimes what we need most is precisely what we convince ourselves we don't deserve." The words hit uncomfortably close to home. Bryson turned away, busying himself with gathering the split logs. "Grace deserves better than a recluse with nightmares." "Why don't you let her decide what she deserves?" Jenkins countered. "The town's spring social is this Saturday. She'll be there with Emma. You should come." "I don't do socials," Bryson muttered. "Then start," Jenkins advised bluntly, remounting his horse, "before someone else catches her eye. She's already turned down 2 suitors, but her grace period as the new widow in town won't last forever." With that parting shot, Jenkins wheeled his horse around and started back toward town, leaving Bryson standing amid scattered logs, his thoughts in turmoil. The idea that Grace had been asking about him, that she might harbor feelings similar to his own, was both exhilarating and terrifying. Bryson had built his life around solitude, convinced it was the only way to manage the memories that haunted him. The prospect of opening himself to another person, of being vulnerable, of risking rejection or loss, was almost unthinkable. And yet, the image of Grace's face as she'd turned to say goodbye, the feel of her kiss on his cheek, the warmth of her presence in his cabin, all these memories had sustained him through the empty weeks since her departure. Perhaps Jenkins was right. Perhaps it was time to stop hiding. The spring social was held in the town's newly constructed assembly hall, a plain but sturdy building that served as church, school auditorium, and general gathering place for Reading's growing population. Bryson arrived later than intended, having spent an inordinate amount of time debating what to wear before settling on his least worn shirt and the trousers he kept for trips to Sacramento. The hall was decorated with early spring flowers and ribbons, a cheerful attempt to hasten winter's departure. A small band played in the corner, and several couples were already dancing. Children darted between adults, playing their own games while their parents socialized. Bryson paused in the doorway, suddenly uncertain. He hadn't attended a social function in years, and the noise and crowd were already making him tense. Perhaps this had been a mistake. "Mr. Bryson!" The delighted cry cut through his anxiety. Emma was running toward him, her dark curls bouncing, her face alight with joy. She wore a pretty blue dress with a white pinafore, looking every inch the proper young lady despite her exuberant greeting. "You came," she exclaimed, skidding to a stop before him. "Mama said you might, but I wasn't sure. You don't like town much, do you?" "Not usually," Bryson admitted, smiling despite himself at her forthright manner. "But I made an exception tonight." "Come see Mama," Emma insisted, grabbing his hand. "She's talking to Mrs. Henderson about books, and it's very boring." Allowing himself to be led through the crowd, Bryson spotted Grace near the refreshment table, engaged in conversation with the minister's wife. She wore a simple dress of deep green that complemented her eyes and brought out the auburn highlights in her brown hair. She looked content, at ease in her new role as the town's teacher. Then she saw him, and her expression transformed. Joy, surprise, and something deeper flashed across her face, sending a jolt of awareness through Bryson's body. "Bryson," she said softly as Emma dragged him to her side. "You came." "Jenkins delivered your invitation," he replied, suddenly acutely conscious of his rough appearance among the townspeople. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Grace assured him quickly. "I'm delighted you're here, Mrs. Henderson. This is Mr. Bryson Calloway, the man I told you about, the one who saved Emma and me during the blizzard." Mrs. Henderson, a plump, pleasant-faced woman in her 50s, beamed at him. "My goodness, the famous Mr. Calloway. Emma speaks of you constantly. Such a heroic rescue, carrying the child through a blizzard. It's like something from a novel." Bryson shifted uncomfortably under her admiring gaze. "It wasn't as dramatic as it sounds. Anyone would have done the same." "I disagree," Mrs. Henderson declared. "Not everyone would risk their life for strangers. Now, if you'll excuse me, I see my husband signaling. He likely needs help with the punch bowl." She patted Grace's arm. "Enjoy the evening, my dear, and do save a dance for Mr. Calloway." As the minister's wife departed, Bryson found himself alone with Grace and Emma, and suddenly tongue-tied. What had seemed imperative during his solitary ride to town now felt presumptuous. Grace had built a life here in Reading. Who was he to disrupt it? "You look well," he said finally, breaking the awkward silence. "As do you," Grace replied, her eyes taking in his cleaned-up appearance with approval. "Town life agrees with us, though Emma misses the mountains. And thunder," she added with a small smile. "Is Thunder outside?" Emma asked eagerly. "Can I see him?" "He is," Bryson confirmed, "but perhaps later. I believe he's enjoying a well-deserved rest after the ride." Emma pouted briefly, but was soon distracted by the arrival of several other children her age. "Can I go play with Sarah and Billy, Mama?" "Yes, but stay where I can see you," Grace instructed. As Emma darted off, Grace turned back to Bryson with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "She's adjusted well, but she still has moments of anxiety when I'm out of sight. The blizzard affected her more than she lets on." "Children are resilient, but some experiences leave marks," Bryson observed, thinking of his own childhood trauma, the loss of his mother when he was only slightly older than Emma. "She's fortunate to have you as her guide." "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing right by her," Grace admitted, her gaze following her daughter across the room. "Thomas would have known better how to help her through this." "I doubt that," Bryson said with quiet conviction. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Grace." "I saw it in the mountains." Her eyes returned to his, vulnerability and gratitude mingled in their depths. "I've thought about you," she confessed softly. "About those days in your cabin. They should have been the worst of my life, considering the circumstances, but instead..." "Instead?" Bryson prompted when she trailed off. "Instead, they were a respite, a chance to breathe after months of struggling alone." Grace's cheeks colored slightly. "That probably sounds foolish." "Not foolish at all," Bryson assured her. "I've thought about those days too. The cabin has seemed empty without you and Emma." The admission cost him something, a piece of the armor he'd so carefully constructed over the years, but the way Grace's expression softened made it worthwhile. "Why didn't you come to town sooner?" she asked. "Emma has been watching for you every day." "Just Emma?" The question escaped before Bryson could reconsider it. Grace held his gaze steadily. "No," she said simply. "Not just Emma." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings neither had been prepared to confront during their time in the cabin. The band struck up a new tune, a waltz that drew couples to the center of the hall. "Would you dance with me, Grace?" Bryson asked impulsively, offering his hand. Surprise flickered across her face, followed by pleasure. "I'd be delighted," she replied, placing her hand in his. Bryson led her to the dance floor, acutely aware of the curious glances from Redding's residents. The reclusive mountain man dancing with the new schoolteacher was certain to fuel gossip for weeks to come. But as he took Grace in his arms, all thoughts of the townspeople faded. It had been years since Bryson had danced, not since before the war, but his body remembered the steps. Grace moved with natural grace, following his lead as if they had danced together countless times before. "You're full of surprises, Mr. Calloway," she murmured as they turned about the floor. "I wouldn't have taken you for a dancer. My mother insisted I learn," he explained. "She believed every gentleman should know how to waltz." "She was right," Grace approved, "though I suspect you haven't had much opportunity to practice in your cabin." "The Bears are poor partners," Bryson agreed with mock solemnity, rewarded by Grace's delighted laugh. As they continued to dance, Bryson found himself relaxing into the moment. The hall, the crowd, the curious eyes all receded into insignificance compared to the woman in his arms, her hand warm in his, her eyes reflecting the soft lamplight. "I've missed you," he admitted quietly, the words emerging without conscious thought. Grace's steps faltered slightly before she recovered. "I've missed you too," she replied, her voice barely audible over the music. "More than I expected." The waltz ended too soon. As the final notes faded, Bryson reluctantly released Grace, though he kept her hand in his as they moved to the edge of the dance floor. "Would you like some punch?" he offered, unwilling to end their time together. "Yes, thank you," Grace accepted, her cheeks flushed from the dance or perhaps from something more. As Bryson fetched refreshments, he caught sight of Emma watching them from across the room, a satisfied smile on her young face. The child was remarkably perceptive for her age, he reflected. He returned to Grace's side, offering her a cup of punch. "Your daughter appears to approve of our dance," he observed, nodding toward Emma. Grace followed his gaze and smiled fondly. "Emma has been quite determined that you should visit. She has a rather romantic notion of your role in our rescue." "Oh," Bryson raised an eyebrow, curious despite himself. "She's convinced you're a hero from one of her storybooks," Grace explained, a hint of amusement in her voice. "The brave knight who rescued the princess and her mother from certain doom." Bryson chuckled, though the comparison made him uncomfortable. "Hardly a knight, just a man who happened to be in the right place at the right time." "Is that truly all it was?" Grace asked, her tone shifting to something more serious. "Just chance?" The question caught him off guard. "What else would it be?" Grace shook her head slightly, as if reconsidering her words. "Nothing. It's just, sometimes I wonder if there might be more design to life's encounters than we acknowledge." Before Bryson could respond to this unexpected philosophical turn, they were interrupted by Harold Jenkins and his wife, a pleasant woman whose name Bryson had never bothered to learn. "Calloway, you actually came," Jenkins observed with poorly concealed satisfaction. "Mrs. Jenkins, you remember Mrs. Blackburn, our new schoolteacher, and this is Bryson Calloway, who spends more time with bears than people, generally speaking." "A pleasure, Mr. Calloway," Mrs. Jenkins said warmly. "We've heard so much about your heroic rescue." "It's been exaggerated," Bryson demurred, growing increasingly uncomfortable with the town's romanticized version of events. "Nonsense," Mrs. Jenkins contradicted. "Carrying a child through a blizzard, it's the talk of Reading, and Mrs. Blackburn has been a wonderful addition to our community. The children adore her." "She's an excellent teacher," Bryson agreed, glancing at Grace, whose cheeks had colored at the praise. The conversation continued pleasantly enough, though Bryson found himself growing tense as more townspeople joined their circle, each eager to meet the reclusive rescuer they'd heard so much about. By the time they'd been talking for 15 minutes, he was fighting the urge to retreat. Grace seemed to sense his discomfort. "Would you mind walking with me for a moment?" she asked quietly during a lull in the conversation, I could use some fresh air." Grateful for the escape, Bryson nodded. They excused themselves and made their way outside, where the spring night was cool but not unpleasant. Stars glittered overhead, and the sounds of the social faded as they moved away from the hall. "You looked like you needed rescue yourself," Grace observed with gentle understanding. "It must be overwhelming after your solitary life." "I'm not good with crowds," Bryson admitted. "Not since the war. Too much noise, too many people moving unpredictably." "Thomas was the same way," Grace said softly. "He would break into a cold sweat at the theater or during church socials." "The war changes a man," Bryson said simply. "Some wounds don't leave visible scars." They walked in companionable silence for a time, following the main street toward the edge of town. Thunder nickered a greeting as they approached the hitching post where Bryson had left him. "Hello, old friend," Grace murmured, stroking the horse's nose. "We've missed you too." Watching her with his horse, Bryson felt a surge of emotion so powerful it momentarily robbed him of speech. Grace belonged here in this moment with him. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. "Grace," he began, not entirely sure what he meant to say, but knowing he needed to say something before courage failed him. "I didn't just come for the social tonight." She turned to face him, her expression open and expectant in the moonlight. "I hope not. These past weeks." "Thinking of you and Emma." Bryson struggled to find the right words. "My cabin feels empty now. I never noticed the silence before, but now it's deafening." Grace stepped closer, close enough that he could see the individual flecks of gold in her green eyes. "What are you saying, Bryson?" "I'm saying I'd like to court you properly," he stated, the words rushing out before he could reconsider. "If you're amenable. I know I'm not much of a catch, a scarred ex-soldier living in the mountains, but I believe we might find happiness together." Grace's eyes widened, then softened. "Oh, Bryson," she breathed. "I've been hoping you would say something like that since the day we parted." "You have?" he asked, scarcely believing what he was hearing. "Yes," she confirmed, reaching out to touch his face gently. "I tried to tell myself it was just gratitude or the intensity of our shared experience in the blizzard. But it's more than that. When I'm with you, I feel safe, understood. And when we're apart, I find myself looking toward the mountains, wondering what you're doing, if you're thinking of us too." "Every day," Bryson confessed, covering her hand with his own. "I think of you every day." The distance between them vanished as Bryson drew her closer. Their first kiss was tentative, a gentle exploration that quickly deepened as years of loneliness and longing gave way to newfound hope. Grace's lips were soft beneath his, her body warm and yielding as she pressed closer. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Bryson rested his forehead against hers. "Is this real?" he wondered aloud. Grace laughed softly, the sound like music in the quiet night. "As real as the stars above us," she assured him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. "As real as the snow that brought us together." They might have remained there longer, lost in their newfound connection, had Emma not chosen that moment to come looking for them. "Mama, Mr. Bryson." Her small voice called from the direction of the assembly hall. "Mrs. Henderson says it's time for the children's dance." Grace stepped back slightly, though she kept her hand in Bryson's. "We're here, Emma," she called back, "by Mr. Bryson's horse." Emma approached, her expression brightening when she saw them together. "Are you going to marry my mama?" she asked with a child's directness, causing both adults to flush. "Emma," Grace admonished, mortified by her daughter's bluntness, but Bryson found himself smiling. "Not just yet, Miss Emma," he replied seriously. "First, I need to court your mother properly. Would that meet with your approval?" Emma considered this with a solemn nod. "Yes, but you should know I want a little brother or sister someday, and a dog, and thunder." Grace covered her face with her free hand, thoroughly embarrassed now, but Bryson merely chuckled. "Those are reasonable requests," he agreed, winking at the child. "Now, I believe there's a dance you're supposed to attend." Emma brightened. "Will you dance with me too, Mr. Bryson?" All the other girls get to dance with their papas. The innocent request struck Bryson to the core. He glanced at Grace, who was watching him with a mixture of tenderness and uncertainty, clearly concerned about how he would respond to such an emotionally loaded question. "I would be honored to dance with you, Emma," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "If your mother doesn't mind." "I think it's a wonderful idea," Grace replied softly, her eyes suspiciously bright. Emma beamed, taking Bryson's free hand and tugging him back toward the assembly hall. "Come on. They're going to play the Virginia reel." As they followed Emma back to the social, still hand in hand, Bryson marveled at the unexpected turn his life had taken. A month ago, he had been a solitary figure, convinced that isolation was his fate. Now, he walked beside the woman who had somehow slipped past his defenses, with her daughter chattering happily ahead of them. "You've bewitched us both, you know," Grace murmured, watching Emma's excitement. "She hasn't stopped talking about you since the blizzard." "I'm not used to being anyone's hero," Bryson admitted. "It's disconcerting." "Get used to it," Grace advised with a soft smile. "Emma has quite decided on your role in our lives, and I find myself in complete agreement with her assessment." Bryson's heart swelled with a joy he had thought forever beyond his reach. "Then I'll do my best to live up to it," he promised, sealing the vow with another quick kiss before they rejoined the festivities. The weeks that followed were among the happiest of Bryson's life. True to his word, he courted Grace properly, riding into town 2 or 3 times a week to spend time with her and Emma. They took walks along Reading's growing streets, shared picnics by the creek when the weather permitted, and slowly learned the contours of each other's lives. Grace told him about her childhood in Boston, her marriage to Thomas shortly before he left for war, and the difficult years that followed his return. Bryson shared stories of his own past his mother's death when he was 10, his father's subsequent descent into drink, and his enlistment in the army as much to escape as to serve. "I never thought I'd find peace again after the war," he confessed one evening as they sat on the porch of the teacher's cottage, watching Emma play with the stray dog she had adopted, with Bryson's encouragement and Grace's reluctant permission. "I saw and did things that haunt me still." "Does talking about it help?" Grace asked gently, her hand warm in his. "Sometimes," Bryson admitted. "More than I expected. Thomas never spoke of it." Grace shook her head. "He tried to protect me from those memories." "I respected his choice, but sometimes I wondered if silence truly helped him heal." "Each man copes differently," Bryson reflected. "But I find that sharing the burden with you makes it lighter somehow." Grace leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture that had become familiar and cherished. "I'm glad," she said simply. "I want to know all of you, Bryson, the parts that bring you joy and the parts that cause you pain. Both make you the man you are." Such acceptance was a balm to Bryson's scarred soul. With each passing day, his fears receded further, replaced by a growing certainty that his future belonged with Grace and Emma. By mid-April, Bryson had made a decision. He spoke first with Emma, taking her on a special ride on Thunder while Grace prepared end-of-term assessments for her students. "Emma," he began as they sat beside a small stream, sharing the cookies Grace had packed for their outing, "I want to ask your mother a very important question, but I thought I should speak with you first." Emma looked up at him with solemn brown eyes, uncommonly perceptive for her 6 years. "You want to marry her," she stated matter-of-factly. Bryson smiled, unsurprised by her insight. "I do. Would that be all right with you?" Emma considered the question with endearing seriousness. "Will you be my papa then?" The question touched Bryson deeply. "If you'd like me to be," he replied carefully. "I could never replace your real father, but I would be honored to be a father to you." "Papa is in heaven with the angels," Emma said with the simple faith of childhood. "But he told me in a dream that it's okay to have a new papa here. He said he picked you special for us." Bryson blinked back unexpected tears. "Did he now?" Emma nodded emphatically. "He said you would keep us safe and make Mama smile again, and you do. She smiles all the time now." "Then I have your blessing?" Bryson asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," Emma decided. "But you have to promise to teach me to track animals like you do, and to fish, and to shoot." "When you're older," Bryson agreed, ruffling her curls affectionately. "Much older for the shooting part. Your mother would have my hide otherwise." Emma giggled, satisfied with his promise. "Mama will say yes," she assured him confidently. "She loves you. She told Mrs. Henderson so." Bryson's heart leapt at this second-hand confirmation of Grace's feelings. Though they had grown increasingly close over the past weeks, neither had spoken the word love aloud, perhaps both wary of rushing into emotional declarations after their respective losses. 2 days later, Bryson invited Grace to ride with him to his cabin, their first return to the place where their story had begun. Emma stayed with Mrs. Henderson, who was more than happy to have the child's company for the day. The journey was pleasant, the spring landscape a stark contrast to the blizzard conditions of their first meeting. Wildflowers dotted the meadows, and the forest was alive with birdsong. Grace rode her own horse now, a gentle mare Bryson had helped her select from the local livery stable. "It looks different," Grace observed as the cabin came into view. "Greener, more welcoming." "Spring changes everything," Bryson agreed, though he knew the real difference was that he now saw his home through new eyes, imagining it not as a solitary refuge, but as a potential family dwelling. They dismounted and tended to the horses, working together with the easy companionship that had developed between them. Inside the cabin, Grace moved about with familiar comfort, noting the small changes Bryson had made since her departure. "You've added curtains," she observed with surprise, touching the simple blue fabric that now hung at the windows. "Seemed like the place needed some softening," Bryson admitted, slightly embarrassed. "Jenkins' wife helped me select the material." Grace smiled, touched by this evidence of his effort. "It's perfect." Bryson prepared coffee, still his specialty, while Grace explored the cabin further. He watched her move about the space that had once been his alone, marveling at how right her presence felt within these walls. When the coffee was ready, he suggested they sit outside to enjoy the spring sunshine. They settled on the rough-hewn bench Bryson had positioned to catch the morning light, their shoulders touching companionably as they sipped from tin cups. "I've been thinking," Bryson began, his heart racing despite his outward calm. "A dangerous pastime," Grace teased gently. "Indeed," he agreed with a smile. "Particularly for a solitary man accustomed to bears as his primary company." Grace laughed, the sound mingling with the birdsong around them. "And what conclusions has your thinking yielded?" "That I love you," Bryson stated simply, turning to meet her startled gaze. "That my life began anew the day I found you in the snow. That I cannot imagine returning to existence without you and Emma." Grace's eyes widened, the coffee cup trembling slightly in her hands. "Bryson." He took the cup gently from her grasp and set it aside, then clasped both her hands in his. "I'm not a man of fancy words, Grace. I can't offer you wealth or social standing, but I can offer you my heart, my protection, and my solemn vow to cherish you and Emma for all my days." He paused, gathering his courage. "Will you marry me?" Tears sprang to Grace's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she whispered. "Oh, Bryson, yes. I love you to have loved you, I think, since you carried my daughter through the snow." Bryson gathered her into his arms, his heart so full it seemed it might burst from his chest. Their kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. When they finally parted, Grace rested her forehead against his. "Emma will be thrilled," she murmured. "She's been dropping rather unsubtle hints about wanting you as her papa." "I know," Bryson admitted with a chuckle. "We had a man-to-man talk about it 2 days ago." She gave her approval with conditions. Grace raised an eyebrow. "Conditions? I'm to teach her tracking, fishing, and eventually shooting," Bryson explained. "And apparently there was some mention of a sibling in her negotiations with you as well." Grace blushed beautifully. "That child has no sense of propriety," she lamented, though her eyes danced with amusement. "But yes, she has informed me several times that a brother would be acceptable." "And what about you?" Bryson asked softly, his hand caressing her cheek. "Would more children be something you desire?" "With you," Grace's eyes softened with love. "Yes, very much so." They spent the afternoon planning their future practical discussions of where they would live, the cabin in summer, the teacher's cottage during the school term, when they would marry, June, after the school year ended, and how they would blend their separate lives into one shared existence. "Will you be happy here?" Bryson asked as they prepared to return to town. "It's a far cry from Boston or even Sacramento." Grace looked around at the wilderness that had once nearly claimed her life but now promised a new beginning. "With you and Emma. I couldn't imagine being happier anywhere else." Their wedding took place on the first day of summer, a simple ceremony in Redding's small church with the town's residents in attendance. Emma served as flower girl, beaming with pride as she scattered wildflower petals down the aisle ahead of her mother. Grace was radiant in a gown of ivory silk, a gift from the women of Redding, who had pooled their resources to provide their beloved teacher with a proper wedding dress. Bryson, uncomfortable in his new suit but determined to do justice to the occasion, watched in wonder as she walked toward him, scarcely able to believe his good fortune. "You look beautiful," he whispered as she reached his side. "And you look very handsome," she returned with a smile that made his heart skip a beat. The minister's words washed over them as they gazed into each other's eyes, their responses clear and confident when required. And then it was done. They were husband and wife, their separate journeys now merged into a single path forward. The celebration afterward was joyous, with food and music and dancing. Emma flitted among the guests, proudly introducing Bryson as "my new papa" to anyone who would listen. The townspeople, initially skeptical of the match between their refined teacher and the reclusive mountain man, had come to accept and even celebrate their union. As the festivities continued into evening, Bryson found a moment alone with his new wife, drawing her away from the crowd for a private word. "Are you happy, Mrs. Calloway?" he asked, still marveling at the reality of calling her by his name. "Completely," Grace assured him, her eyes shining with love. "And you? No regrets about abandoning your solitary existence?" "None," Bryson replied with absolute certainty. "Though I do have one wedding gift for you that I couldn't present in public." Grace raised a curious eyebrow as he withdrew a folded document from his pocket. "What is this?" "The deed to a parcel of land adjacent to the cabin," Bryson explained. "Jenkins helped me arrange the purchase. It's good grazing land with access to the creek. I thought perhaps we might expand a bit, build a proper ranch over time." Grace unfolded the document, her eyes widening as she read. "Calloway Ranch," she murmured. "Oh, Bryson, it's perfect. Room for horses, cattle, maybe even sheep. And children," he added softly. Plenty of room for our family to grow." Grace's eyes misted with happy tears as she rose on tiptoe to kiss him. "I love you, Bryson Calloway, more than I have words to express." "And I love you, Grace Calloway," he returned, his arms tightening around her. "You and Emma both. You brought me back to life when I thought that part of me was long dead." Their kiss was interrupted by Emma's arrival, her expression a mixture of excitement and determination. "Mrs. Henderson says it's time for the special dance," she informed them. "The one where everyone watches the bride and groom." Bryson chuckled at her phrasing. "I believe that's our cue, Mrs. Calloway." Hand in hand, they followed Emma back to the celebration, stepping into the center of the floor as the musicians struck up a waltz. As they moved together, Bryson was struck by how far they had come from that fateful day in the blizzard. "What are you thinking?" Grace asked, noting his expression. "That sometimes being lost leads to being found," he replied, his voice husky with emotion. "And that I'm the luckiest man in the world to have found you." Grace's answering smile was all the response he needed. 5 years later, Bryson Calloway stood on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching as the sun set over Calloway Ranch. What had begun as a simple homestead had grown into a prosperous operation, with cattle grazing on the hillsides and a vegetable garden that was the envy of Redding. Emma, now 11, was helping Grace prepare dinner inside, their voices raised in a song Bryson didn't recognize but found enchanting nonetheless. His eldest son, 3-year-old Thomas, named for Grace's first husband, was attempting to corral a litter of puppies born to Emma's dog the previous month. And in the cradle near the fireplace, 2-month-old Sarah slept peacefully, untroubled by the happy chaos around her. Life wasn't perfect. There were still difficult days when the memories of war pressed too close, when the responsibilities of ranch and family seemed overwhelming, when Grace's own ghosts visited in the form of grief for the husband she had loved and lost. But they faced these challenges together, their love strengthened by the trials they had endured and the joy they had created. Each winter, when the first snow fell on the mountains, they took a moment to remember the blizzard that had brought them together, the desperate journey that had led to their shared happiness. As Bryson watched his family through the window, he offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the twist of fate that had placed him in the path of a woman lost in the snow with her daughter. Had he taken a different route that day? Had he ignored Thunder's unease? Had he dismissed the dark shape against the white landscape, his life would have remained empty, his heart locked away. Instead, he had a family, a home filled with love and laughter, and a future brighter than any he could have imagined during his solitary days. The front door opened, and Grace stepped onto the porch, Sarah cradled in her arms. "Dinner's ready," she announced, her smile as warm and welcoming as it had been the day he asked her to be his wife. "Emma's quite proud of her biscuits." "As she should be," Bryson replied, wrapping an arm around his wife's shoulders and pressing a kiss to their daughter's downy head. "She's becoming quite the cook." "Among other things," Grace agreed with a mixture of pride and exasperation. "She skinned the rabbit you brought home yesterday without a single complaint. I'm not sure whether to be impressed or concerned." Bryson chuckled. "She's her father's daughter in some ways, and her mother's in others," Grace added. "Mrs. Henderson tells me she's the best reader in the upper form." They stood together for a moment longer, watching as the last rays of sunlight painted the mountains gold. "Are you happy, Bryson?" Grace asked softly, an echo of the question she had posed on their wedding day. Bryson tightened his arm around her shoulders, his heart full to bursting with contentment. "More than I ever thought possible," he assured her. "Every day with you and our children is a gift I never expected to receive." Grace leaned her head against his shoulder, a familiar gesture that still warmed him to his core. "Then we are both blessed beyond measure," she murmured, "for you are the answer to a prayer I didn't know I was making that day in the snow." Together, they turned and entered their home, closing the door on the gathering dusk and stepping into the light and warmth of the life they had built, a life that had begun when a woman lost in the snow with her daughter found not just rescue, but a love that would sustain them all through the years to come.